Good morning. Welcome to the 10:15 session. The session you're in is Camtasia. I made custom online activities using my actual lab equipment. Hi, my name is Ken Flowers. I'll be hosting the session. I'm the Dean of Career and Workforce Education at Lake Michigan College. We're welcoming today Ben Smith from Grand Rapids Community College. Ben has taught automotive technology at GRCC since 2009. Prior to GRCC, he taught and developed automotive technician training for Ford and General Motors dealership technicians. Most of his experience with Ford and General Motors was with distance technology in the form of web-based training and synchronous closed-circuit television courses. Welcome, Ben.
Thanks, Ken. Turn on a camera there. Of course, they came to mow my lawn right before we started this. So I don't know if the microphone is picking up. They're almost done, I think, with the leaf blower out there. I've just never felt more like somebody going to work from his basement than I do right now. But I think it's going to work okay.
Good.
They're almost done, so they're not that loud. Of course, you know, what happened to me was what happened to everyone last fall. We found out, well, before last fall, that we were going to teach remotely. Automotive, you can't teach very much remotely. So luckily, we were able to have labs in person at GRCC, socially distant, where we had about 7 students at a time would come in. And so instead of having a lab one day a week, I had labs twice a week and had some lectures online. And labs in person. If I take a look at some of my lab equipment that I'm talking about here, if I go back to my PowerPoint, in engine performance, it's pretty straightforward to make that something somewhat online because it's laptop-based equipment or tablet, really, the newer ones. And it just looks like this, where you can make a screen and all these little squares can be menu items. And it makes a lot of sense to do that. And I can show you how I did that. More importantly to me, though, is that I have some equipment that looks like this. It's just a voltmeter, ohm meter, a digital multimeter, technically is what it's called, the gray and red thing in the middle. And then we just have this trainer board that we call it, about 12 of them that we have students build circuits on, and they learn to use the meter on this because it's easier to see what you're doing without having to really know how to read a schematic very well. And cars are very complicated, and this is very simple. In my Unit 1 for electrical class, I have a hands-on test that they take where they just do some basic tests with this equipment, where I build a circuit and they test it. I ask them a couple of different types of voltage that they should measure and some resistance and some current in amps, and they write it down, and hopefully they get, all of them correct, and we can move on in the class. Unfortunately, as I went through this, what I started to get the idea of in that electrical class is I looked at them in lab and saw how often I had to represent something or remind people how to make those measurements properly. I kind of felt like maybe we weren't going to have as good a time on that hands-on test as I was hoping to have. And so I was quite concerned, and, necessity does some things for you. So what I did was I got on Camtasia, which I was using to make lectures, and I had some quizzes on there. And I had found that you can make a hotspot where people can click and it will actually move ahead and behind in the video. And so I made a hands-on test. Really, I made the practice for the hands-on test on there. It's very rough. It's definitely not exactly what you'd hope or exactly like using the hands-on equipment in the lab. But if I go over here and take a look at it, GRCC, we put our stuff on Nomia on that website right now. It's switching to Panopto, but I'm looking at Nomia right now, and I've got this hands-on test practice that we can navigate over to. And so it looks a little bit like this. I don't know if I can get my full screen to work on here. The students would come in and see this. I didn't have a lot of instructions or a lot of time to create this. And the first thing that you think of when you try to make something online, or that I thought of, was that I need to make it as much like the lab equipment as I could, which I initially thought I should make some stuff that has like the wrong answers and what would it look like if you hooked up the meter incorrectly. Quickly, I realized I couldn't do that. So what I came up with was something like this. You can kind of see down at the bottom, it kind of played to here and stopped on its own. If I just click one of these things and say, I want to practice voltage drop testing, it jumps forward and you can kind of see the menu bar down there moves forward, and then it stops. And I've got some instructions on the screen. It says, click the correct setting on the meter. You can't click the wrong stuff. I just didn't have time to make the wrong thing. And when I got done making the correct thing, I realized that this thing gives you feedback on its own automatically, because the feedback is if I try to click the wrong setting, it doesn't let me do it. If I click the right thing, it just jumps forward, or jumps around in the timeline anyway, and gives me the correct setting, and I can see what it should look like. And then I get another instruction. If you were in my class, and maybe some of you already know all this, but students in my class would know what voltage drop on the ground wire is. So I'm telling you, you need to do a voltage drop on the ground wire. So click the correct spot for the black lead on your meter. I can't make it so you can drag it. Someone probably can, but I couldn't. I made it so down here where your ground wire belongs, you've got two spots you could click. Doesn't matter which one you click, it just goes to the same picture, because that's what I had time to do. So it goes right there and you get to see what's right. And I kind of think, as practice for a test, or as a way to remind yourself and studying the right answer is a good idea. And then it tells you, hey, where do you put the red lead? And if I click where the red lead on the DMM goes, there's only one right spot. Again, my mouse pointer turns into an extended index finger, and I can only click there and I get the right answer. And then I get a thing that says I can return to the main menu. To some extent, I have some concern about just giving them right answers, of course. But at the same time, I also have some concern about letting them get the wrong answer over and over again, where I don't think that there's any number of times they can practice it incorrectly in order to learn how to do it right. So I put that together and I said, I hope this works. And I showed it to my students. I said, if you're having trouble with this, if it's one measurement or two measurement, whatever it is, if you're struggling in lab, you should really practice this. And I said, you should look at it and realize there's no talking in it. There's no text box that comes up. There's no grading or feedback like that. But I told them to look at it and make sure they realized where that meter was hooked up, because when they came into class, if they remembered how that worked, then they could do it and they'd get the right answer on the test. Not 100% sure how well that worked. What I actually did is go back, of course, and I looked at what kind of test results I got. And I said, when I gave that hands-on test back in the fall of 2019, my two sections of students ended up with about a 74% on average. In fall of 2020, when I made this, they got a 76%, which basically says nothing changed. To me, if we went 2 percentage points in either direction, my gut feeling was that we were going to get something like a 56%. So I was kind of satisfied when I saw a 76% that I at least hadn't dropped down any lower, and I thought we could move ahead with the class. Of course, my story in fall of 2021 is that the average score went up to 80% because I just gave them better instructions before they used their practice, before they took the test, or that I did better in the lab or something like that. Obviously, I want to think the work that I did into putting together that practice is what did it, but I can't prove it. It's always just kind of the problem of being when you are a researcher, I guess you can figure that out a little bit better. I probably could go and look at the test scores and see who looked at this through Nomia. It does give you that information, and see how many times they looked at that hands-on test practice and figure out if there's more reason to believe that it helped or not. Did people who looked at that practice do better on the test than those who didn't? But I just don't have that kind of time always to go and look at that. So as a practitioner, I'm going with my gut feeling that, yeah, they were struggling in lab, but they still basically got the same score as the year before. And then this year, I don't know that 76 to 80% is the biggest increase that I should go bragging about that or writing home yet, but I still think that it tells me that I've got something that's useful there. So the way I did it, if I go and look in Camtasia and share my entire screen here, which is taking my computer a little bit of time as I do it. So when I look in Camtasia, if you've not used it before, it's kind of a complicated looking screen that you get. This one had quite a few menu options, and if I zoom out, you can kind of see the whole thing. My entire timeline ended up being not quite 3 minutes, and there's kind of a lot of complicated looking stuff there, but if you build it up slowly, it's not actually that hard to do this. I just basically made a PowerPoint slide is what you're looking at here, and I put some hotspots on it, and that's how I made a menu. If we started with something a little bit less complicated, I can go down here and look at this where I only have a couple things on the screen. This is where you've taken a measurement and now it's got the menu item to return back to the main menu. Of course, down here at the bottom of the screen on track 1, that's just my my still picture that's up there. The hotspot that they're going to click is just here, this arrow that I've got there, and the hotspot is this track 2 that I've built on there. And if we look at my screen is moving so slow that it kind of locked up there on me and gives me a blank. Over here on the right, you get you can look at what's put over there in your, as far as your hotspots and things like that. It's looking at a test question because it's moved ahead on me because I'm clicking a little bit randomly with my mouse back here in the background. If we were to build one of these up from scratch, it might make a little bit more sense. So if I go to a new project, no, I don't want to save that. Just need to go to my library and we'll just take a couple pictures and drag them down here. If you haven't used Camtasia, the way you get media here, a picture to drag down, there is this plus button, and wherever you've saved your image, you just have to navigate to that the same way you would if you're navigating to a Word document or a PowerPoint document or something like that. I'm just randomly taking some pictures that I had available and putting them down there so that we can have an example. We'll make that a little bit bigger and zoom in on that to where it might be a bit easier to see. If I move out here to my my timeline, we can see my picture on the screen. If I want them to have to click, this is just a wooden box I made, my own trainer to help practice working on a simple circuit before they got working on a car. Over here is kind of just a little on-off switch. If I need a hotspot right there and I say I want you to click the on button in order to get something to happen on the screen, I'm going to go over here and pick an annotation. And if I find these call outs, I can find this blank box right here. You just drag it over and put it around the switch. If I make it as small as I can to try and be accurate with where my students have to click, it kind of looks like that. It has a white line around it. You can leave that there if you want to tell them where to click. If I just go over here on the right, I got to make sure I've clicked this annotations tab with the kind of the text box with the letter A in it. If I just drag this down and make the opacity 0%, now that line won't show up around there. probably want to make this smaller so that it doesn't go out past my image. And I may want to make it longer so that it's about the same length as the image that I've got here. If I go over here where it says more way over on the left, then I can go ahead and find visual effects right here. And I've got a hotspot. I can click that over here and drag it to my little annotation square that I put in, and now I actually have an interactive hotspot. I got to go back over to the right and scroll down on my screen, and it shows my interactive hotspot. I want to make it go to a particular time so that it jumps to wherever it is that they're supposed to go after they click that on button, or if you have a selection in there, maybe you're making a branching scenario and you're asking them to decide what they think the next right step in a procedure is. Well, we can click time. And then if I drag this blue cursor on my timeline over to the location that I want them to go, if this is the next branch in my scenario, I can just drag the cursor over there. And then if I click current position, we'll see that my position is 2921 down here on the timeline. And that shows up here in the current position section. So if I go back here, this is where you're at when you click as a student. If I click this test button, it should go over there to my background image that I dragged down there. And so there you see that I've moved there. That's how I got my DMM leads to move on the screen in my example. If I were to just try that one more time, and let's say I'm going to click this picture of a fuel system and drag it down there. If I asked a student to identify the fuel tank, I've got this kind of engine simulator here on my background. If I said, hey, you need to click on the fuel tank, can you show me where a fuel tank is, or what that would look like on here? Well, I'll go to my annotation again. My fuel tank is this red tank down here. So I'll just put that in there. Click on my annotations here again. And I don't really want it highlighted. I'm going to make that a little bit more difficult for them than that. So I'll get rid of the outline, go back to my visual effects and turn that into a hotspot. Now, if they click on the fuel tank and that takes them to a fuel system diagram, I can just move my cursor, click on current position, and that hotspot should take me to that fuel system. And when I click test, sure enough, it does take me to the fuel system diagram. A couple of the things that I learned when I did this, just from a kind of a logistics standpoint, is that sometimes when I'm on Nomia, what happens is it will show up on a blank screen and I would have to click play, and that would probably confuse a student. So what I've done up here, you can kind of see on this one where this shape right here, the actual hotspot, I tend to make that as long from the beginning. I make it start where the background or where my image is, and then I have it kind of stop a little bit short so that when my video stops playing, because it does say pause at end, I need to make sure that's clicked. What'll happen to the user, to my student, is it will stop playing right there. And I'm sure that my image is still on the screen, but I'm kind of making my hotspots not start at the very beginning of my image down here on the timeline. I start a few frames or a few seconds into it and just make them a little bit bigger. When I test it on Nomia, sometimes my images will show up and sometimes it will show up on a blank spot or a blank screen if I tell it to start right at the beginning. If I clicked right here and made my landing point for that previous hotspot right there, and then that's just confusing to the students because they have to click play sometimes. So if you move this timeline in a little bit and say that's the current position that I want to do it, I want to land on, it seems not to have that problem. After I got done with all of that, and I said I've got something built, that I thought was useful. It's pretty rough, but it helped them with the hands-on test. And I did some stuff with the engine performance class where I showed you that picture on the PowerPoint. I did a little bit with that in the fall semester last year where they used the scan tool. It wasn't part of a test, and I don't know necessarily that it helped them a lot, but it did allow me to have a little bit more interactivity where they had to go and click the right selections to test the vehicle and see if it had any diagnostic trouble codes that were turning on their check engine light. And then they went to workshop manual and looked up some information. It was useful in that area. They definitely did get the right information out of the workshop manual. And I said, well, this is good. I should do more of that. I don't know that my actual hands-on test practice, I probably won't use that next year unless I'm able to find the time to update it and make it a little bit more user-friendly, where I don't have to give them instructions and display it in class, and show them, hey, click here and, try and memorize that. I would want to have some more feedback in it to use it in the future. I kind of got that and I was satisfied, and I said, hey, this is something good that I can run with and do something more. And then TechSmith said, we're not going to use Nomia anymore. We're going to use Panopto. So GRCC started moving all our stuff over to Panopto. And I said, okay, I'm going to go look at this. And it turns out my hotspots don't work in Panopto. So I was not very happy. I'd done a lot of extra work and thought I had something I could use, and then I couldn't. But just like last year, necessity being the driver, what I did over here in Camtasia is I went over to the share button and I said, well, let's see if I can find another way to use this. And unfortunately, what's going to happen if I look at that, it's locking my screen up, but let's see what, here we go. Hopefully you see that now. When I click this share button, I have a local file that I can share it to. And if I update, I think I actually have a Panopto button. If you were updated to Camtasia 2021, what I found out with this local file is that if I click that, I can actually save it as something called a SCORM package. And it can go into, we use Blackboard. It just gives me this screen and says, here's my production wizard. Of course, we always read everything that comes up in pop-up windows. If you do read it, it says to include all features on the timeline, such as captions, quizzes, and hotspots, which is exactly what I'm using here, are hotspots. You have to use the Smart Player. Well, when I click next, it's already got it selected, MP4 Smart Player. I just need to select that. And I can go over here. Most of this, I would have to call my IT department to know if I needed to change the size or the video settings, and I haven't used it very much yet in this way, but I'm just not that techie as far as computers are concerned to tell you how to select that. But over here, I do know if I go to this next window, if I click SCORM, and then I go ahead and save it, which takes kind of quite a bit of time on my computer, so we're not going to click it like that. What happens when I make it into a SCORM package is that I can save it and upload it into Blackboard. And so I just kind of have a template that I have in Blackboard that I uploaded this to, and I didn't really save it to a particular course or give it a name in particular. I just put it in there to see if it would work. And I end up with the same thing that I had over in Nomia, and I can use it in Blackboard and I get the same result that I had over there. Not 100% sure that you have to use Camtasia to do that. I never tried to do it without Camtasia. I believe you probably could just do it in PowerPoint and use the hyperlink function in PowerPoint, but you'd probably have to have some sort of third-party plugin that I don't have access to load onto my computer that my IT department would have to do. But if you had that option, you probably could do the same thing. Just using PowerPoint and a plugin and turn it into SCORM and put it on any kind of learning management system. Probably if I really got into Blackboard, I'd be able to find a way even to grade their clicks and figure out which branch they took and things like that. and I could, however much time I have to put in it, I think I could probably do quite a bit with that. Hopefully that can give you some ideas of things you could do. Like I say, my intention to use that later on in my classes would be something more like a branching scenario where you would be asked a question and have 2 or 3 options. And that I could see being used in any kind of subject. Honestly, it wouldn't have to be a hands-on thing. I'm looking over at the chat over here, and I see some questions. What training did I have in Camtasia? It was literally that back in March, I was told I had to put my stuff online, and I went home and I said, oh no, what am I going to do by Monday? Luckily, I had some stuff in automotive from automotive manufacturers where GRCC is partnered with specifically Chrysler and Ford at the time. So I used that as a stopgap, and I came down here in my basement and started clicking around at Camtasia, and just by gosh and by golly was able to find various things. I started just by recording videos and just saw those menu options over there and used the help screen and YouTube basically and said, how do you do this in Camtasia? Is how I learned that. Were you importing MP4 files in Panopto? Cheryl was asking. I actually wasn't importing them in Panopto, so it is possible that I wonder if I had that Panopto selection on my Camtasia menu, if those hotspots would work. It is possible that they would. I didn't go and look at it before. What happened for us is that GRCC's IT department did work to put all our stuff over into Panopto, and maybe it was TechSmith that did it for us. So I just went over and logged into Panopto and checked it, and it didn't work. I haven't had the opportunity to update my Camtasia software and try and update it again, and upload into Panopto that way to see if it would actually work. It may work again in Panopto, and maybe I don't need to put it in Blackboard. So I'm not sure if exactly what the file type would be, because I just selected in Nomia and somebody else transferred it over there. And right now I can't select Nomia. When I tried to put it, if I saved it as a local file, it is an MP4. When I try to drag those into Panopto, it tells me it's not a valid file type. So there is something in that menu selection and hopefully in the update to Camtasia that would maybe make it a little bit easier. I know my inline quizzes that are just multiple choice questions in my other videos, they don't work over in Panopto right now either. And hopefully that would fix that as well if I had that once I update my Camtasia to have the Panopto selection there in the share menu. I'm looking over there. I think I don't see other questions in there. Hopefully I've answered your questions. If you wanted to contact me afterwards, my email at Grand Rapids Community College is pretty easy. It's bsmith@grcc.edu, and I'd be happy to interact with you that way as well if you had questions after today.
I have a question, Ben. So say, for example, on that multimeter, that's a shared skill set in other areas. Have you looked to share that with your electronics instructor or other individuals that potentially could use that as an assessment?
I haven't talked to him about it yet. I've thought of it. I actually have some stuff going on at GRCC where I've worked on a podcast, and I'm going to be at our learning day in January where I'll have an opportunity to talk more, broadly at GRCC. But that is a good idea to go out and talk specifically to the electronics folks, because literally we are not in the same building. There's a short commute for me to go and see my colleagues in electronics there. So that's a good suggestion you make, really, in the form of a question that I should get over there and ask them specifically, because it is a thing that that meter specifically could be shared with other departments.
Ben, if other colleagues are using at GRCC specifically, are using Camtasia are people using whatever they have access to?
I know other people are using Camtasia. I'm not familiar with anyone who's using it literally the way I'm using it with the hotspots and making it interactive in that way. I know they use it with the inline quizzing and, of course, to put videos out there for video lectures and demonstrations, especially in automotive. A lot of my colleagues are making, when they found out that they could use it, they said, I should really have a better demonstration for labs. Where you sometimes have such small parts that you can't get 20 people around it to see it. And so they are using it in that way quite a bit.
No, that's great. Any other questions for Ben? Well, Ben, thank you so much for taking your time with us today. Really appreciate
You're welcome.
it. Yeah.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Have a great day.
Me too.
You bet.